It started as one of those slow, golden afternoons when nothing bad is supposed to happen. The air carried the last warmth of autumn, and the little parking lot outside Miller's Thrift and More smelled faintly of cinnamon from the bakery down the street. Ethan Carver had just locked the shop door behind him, a paper bag tucked under his arm, and his 8-year-old daughter Mia skipping at his side with a second-hand scarf wrapped around her neck. She had found it on the clearance rack for $2.50 and declared it perfect for winter adventures. Ethan smiled at the way she held it like treasure. They cut through the row of parked cars toward their old pickup, talking about what to make for dinner. Somewhere behind them, a delivery truck's door slammed shut. Nothing unusual. Then it came, faint at first, buried under the hum of traffic. A sound sharp enough to slice through the calm. A voice, a girl's voice, not playful, not calling to a friend. It was tight, urgent, scared. Ethan slowed, his brow furrowing. Mia tugged his sleeve. "Dad, did you hear that?" Her eyes had lost their usual spark. A few people walked past, eyes down, coffee cups in hand, as if the world around them didn't exist. The sound came again, clearer this time, a plea tangled with panic. Ethan's heart thudded. He glanced around. To the left, the back alley that ran behind the supermarket sat in shadow, a strip of cracked pavement between the buildings. It looked empty, but that was where the voice had come from. Ethan crouched to meet Mia's eyes, steadying his voice. "I need you to stay right here by the cafe window. See that lady inside with the red apron. If anything happens, go straight to her. Don't move until I'm back." Mia nodded, gripping the scarf like a lifeline. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile, but his chest felt tight as he turned toward the alley. The late afternoon light didn't reach that far back, and every step seemed to pull him deeper into the kind of quiet that feels wrong. He could hear his own boots against the pavement, and then the sound again. Only now it wasn't just fear in the voice. It was desperation. The kind that told you whoever it belonged to had been calling for help long enough to believe no one was coming. Ethan quickened his pace. The alley narrowed quickly, lined with dented trash bins and the faint smell of old cardboard. Somewhere above, a loose gutter tapped against the brick with each gust of wind. About halfway in, Ethan saw her. She was crouched beside the rear bumper of an abandoned delivery truck, her arms wrapped so tightly around herself it looked like she was holding herself together. A dark strand of hair clung to her cheek, damp with either sweat or tears. Her sweater was stretched at the shoulder, one sleeve half torn. When her eyes found him, they widened. Not in relief at first, but in that startled animal way someone looks when they're not sure if you're another threat. Ethan slowed, hands open at his sides. "Hey, you're okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Her voice was barely a whisper. They took my bag." She swallowed hard, the words catching. I yelled, nobody came. Up close, he could see the faint red mark along her jaw, the way her fingers trembled against the fabric of her shirt. She couldn't have been more than 19. Ethan shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "It's all right. You're safe now." His tone was steady, though his pulse was still loud in his ears. She flinched when a car door slammed out on the street, her whole body tensing like she was ready to run. Ethan stepped slightly in front of her, blocking her from the alley's opening, and pulled his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling the police," he said gently. "They'll get here soon." She didn't argue, just stared at the ground, as if afraid that speaking might break whatever fragile safety this moment held. Within minutes, red and blue lights spilled into the alley. An officer stepped out, scanning the scene before walking over. As the officer began asking questions, Ethan glanced toward the street. Through the opening, he could just see Mia, standing exactly where he'd told her, tiny hands pressed against the cafe window, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. When the officers led the young woman toward the patrol car, she hesitated and looked back at him. There was no smile, no thank you, just a silent look that carried the weight of someone who'd been abandoned too many times. Ethan didn't know her story yet, but he knew one thing. Walking away now would feel wrong in a way he couldn't live with. He took Mia's hand, but his thoughts stayed in that alley. The police station smelled faintly of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Ethan sat on a hard plastic chair in the corner, Mia beside him, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck like a small fortress. Across the room, the young woman sat hunched forward on a bench, knees drawn in, the oversized jacket he'd given her hanging loose on her thin frame. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands hidden in the sleeves like she was trying to disappear. An older officer walked past, a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Her name's Sophie," he murmured to Ethan. 19. Says she's been on her own for a while. No ID, no family nearby. Been sleeping wherever she can. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Ethan caught the faint shake of his head, the kind that said this wasn't the first time he'd seen someone like her come through those doors. Mia shifted closer to her dad, glancing at Sophie, then back up at him. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked in a small voice. Ethan wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell Mia the world would take care of people like Sophie, that things would get better from here, but he'd lived long enough to know that wasn't always true. He settled for, "We're going to make sure she's safe tonight." A woman in a navy cardigan entered, introducing herself as Janet from Social Services. She knelt in front of Sophie, speaking softly, but Ethan could hear enough to understand. There were no open beds in any nearby shelter. The closest space was in another county, hours away, and it wouldn't be available until the next night. When Janet straightened up, she looked at Ethan. "We'll keep her here until morning, then figure out transport." Ethan glanced around. The harsh overhead lights, the constant shuffle of uniforms, the hum of a vending machine in the corner. It wasn't the kind of place anyone could rest, especially someone already on edge. Sophie sat like she was bracing for something, her shoulders tense, her jaw set. He leaned toward Janet. "She doesn't have to stay here. I've got a spare room, just for the night. Warm meal, clean bed." Janet studied him. "You're sure? It's a lot to take on, even for a night." "I'm sure," he said without looking away from Sophie. She must have sensed they were talking about her, because she finally lifted her head, eyes wary. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago. I'm not going to be another person who walks away." For the first time since he'd found her, Sophie's gaze softened, like she was trying to decide whether or not to believe him. The ride home was quiet, except for the soft hum of the truck's engine and the occasional rattle from Mia's scarf pin catching in her seatbelt. Sophie sat in the back, staring out the window, her reflection blending with the blurred streetlights. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask anything at all. Ethan pulled into the driveway of a modest one-story house with a sloping porch and a light glowing in the kitchen window. The air outside was colder now, and Sophie tugged his jacket tighter around herself as she followed him up the steps. Mia bounded ahead, holding the door open like she'd been waiting all day to do it. Inside, the warmth was instant, the smell of baked chicken still lingering from earlier, the faint lemon scent from the floors Ethan had mopped that morning. Sophie paused in the entryway, as if crossing that threshold was harder than walking into the police station. "You can leave your shoes there," Ethan said gently, nodding toward a mat by the door. She hesitated, then slipped them off, standing awkwardly in her socks. Mia took her hand without asking and led her toward the small guest room at the end of the hall. "This is your room," Mia said proudly, like she was giving a tour of a castle. The bed was neatly made, a folded quilt at the foot, and a small lamp cast a soft yellow glow. On the pillow lay a handwritten note in green marker. "You're safe here." Sophie's eyes lingered on the note longer than on anything else. She brushed her fingers over it, not saying a word. "Dinner's still warm," Ethan said from the doorway, "if you're hungry." She shook her head at first, then, after a pause, nodded once. At the table she sat across from Mia, who chatted about the scarf and how it was going to match her winter boots perfectly. Sophie didn't speak, but her posture loosened just a little with each bite. When the plates were cleared, Ethan pointed out where the bathroom was and told her to take whatever she needed from the closet. Extra towels, soap, even Mia's strawberry-scented shampoo if she wanted. She stood there for a moment, as if she might refuse, then quietly thanked him. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep, Ethan passed by the guest room. The lamp was still on. Sophie was sitting on the bed, jacket folded neatly beside her, the note still in her hands. She didn't see him watching, but he caught the way her shoulders eased, just enough to let her lean back against the wall. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first step. The next morning, the house was still except for the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen. Ethan was making coffee when he heard soft footsteps behind him. Sophie stood in the doorway, wearing one of Mia's oversized sweatshirts and holding the note from last night, like she hadn't figured out where to put it yet. Her hair was damp, pulled into a loose braid, and her eyes kept darting toward the floor. "Morning," Ethan said, keeping his voice easy. "There's coffee if you want it. Milk's in the fridge." She nodded, but didn't move right away. It was Mia who broke the stillness, bursting into the kitchen with her scarf wrapped around her head like a turban. "You're up," she announced, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Want to help me with the puzzle later? It's 1,000 pieces. My dad hates it." Sophie's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Maybe," she said softly. By mid-morning, she'd ended up at the dining table with Mia, fitting puzzle pieces together in near silence. Every so often, Mia would lean close and whisper something about the picture on the box, and Sophie would nod, sometimes pointing to where a piece might fit. Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway, pretending to be busy with the mail. It wasn't much, but it was more interaction than the night before. Over the next couple of days, Sophie moved through the house quietly, almost like she was trying not to disturb the air. She helped wash dishes without being asked, folded laundry while Mia was at school, and once Ethan caught her straightening the books on the living room shelf. It wasn't about keeping busy. It was about having a reason to stay. One evening, just as the sun slipped below the horizon, the power flickered and went out. Mia groaned, but Sophie froze, her hands curling into fists. Ethan noticed the way her breathing quickened, the way her eyes seemed to search for an exit. "Hey," he said gently, lighting a candle on the counter. "It's just the wind. Happens every winter." He handed her the candle, the warm glow softening the edges of her fear. Mia plopped down on the couch and announced they should build a fort. Sophie hesitated, but within minutes she was draping blankets over chairs, listening to Mia's detailed rules about how forts worked. By the time the lights came back on, the living room was a cave of quilts and laughter. That night, when Ethan passed her door, he saw the candle stub sitting on the nightstand beside the note. Both had been placed carefully like talismans. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was starting to leave her mark. It was a Saturday morning when Ethan noticed it for the first time. He was heading to the laundry room when he passed the guest room and caught sight of Sophie at the small desk by the window. She was leaning over a sheet of paper, her hand moving in quick, practiced strokes. Sunlight spilled across the page, revealing lines that curved into the shape of her face. Not perfect, not finished, but alive in a way that made him pause. She noticed him in the doorway and instinctively slid her hand over the drawing, her shoulders tightening. "Sorry," she murmured, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. Ethan shook his head. "Don't be, that's good, really good." Sophie glanced down, almost embarrassed. "I used to draw, a lot, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she shrugged like the rest of the sentence wasn't worth saying. Later that day, while Mia was at a friend's house, Ethan cleared out a corner of the garage that had been gathering dust and old tools for years. By the time Sophie wandered in to see what he was doing, there was a sturdy table by the window, a couple of shelves, and a box of pencils and paints he'd picked up from the hardware store in town. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "A place for you to draw," he said simply. "Or paint, or whatever you feel like doing. It's yours." She stood there for a moment, looking between the table and him, like she was trying to decide if it was a trick. Then she stepped closer, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "No one's ever made a space just for me before." Ethan shrugged, but his voice softened. Everyone needs a corner of the world that's theirs. That evening, after dinner, Sophie slipped out to the garage. Through the cracked door, Ethan saw her sitting at the table, her head bent over a canvas. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, like she was letting herself sink into it. When she came back inside, her hands were smudged with charcoal, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked less like someone on the edge of running away, and more like someone who might actually stay. A week later, Janet from social services showed up at the house unannounced. Ethan had just finished fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen when he saw her car pull into the driveway. Sophie was in the garage, working on a painting, and Mia was sprawled on the living room floor with her math homework. Janet stepped inside with her clipboard, her smile polite but edged with formality. "I wanted to give you an update," she said, glancing toward the garage door. "A spot has opened at a transitional housing program in the next county. They can take Sophie as early as tomorrow." Ethan felt a slow knot forming in his chest. "Tomorrow? It's a good place," Janet continued. "Safe, structured. It would help her prepare for independent living." He nodded, but his mind was already spinning. Sophie had only been here a short time, but the house felt different with her in it. Warmer somehow. Mia had noticed too. She'd stopped asking when Sophie was leaving and had started asking if she could sit next to her at dinner every night. When Sophie came in from the garage, still wiping her hands on a rag, Janet greeted her and explained the plan. Sophie listened quietly, her expression unreadable, then gave a small nod. "Okay," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something in the way she kept her eyes on the floor that made Ethan's stomach tighten. After Janet left, the evening felt off balance. Sophie ate in near silence, excusing herself early to go back to the garage. Mia poked at her food, finally looking up at Ethan. "If she leaves, who's going to help me finish the puzzle?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was watching the closed garage door, wondering if Sophie was painting to keep her hands busy or to avoid thinking about what came next. The truth was, he didn't want her to go either. Not to a place full of strangers. Not when she'd just started to trust the idea of home. Later that night, he stood in the doorway of the garage. Sophie was at the table, her canvas nearly covered now. The image was of 3 chairs around a small kitchen table, each one painted in warm golden light. For the first time, all 3 seats were full. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I can pack in the morning." Ethan leaned against the frame, choosing his words carefully. "Or," he said, "we could talk about another option." She finally met his eyes, the brush pausing in her hand. "What option?" "The one where you stay. And if you want that, I'll call Janet first thing in the morning to stop the transfer before it happens." Sophie stared at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard right. "Stay here?" she asked slowly, as if testing the words in her mouth. Ethan nodded. "Not just for a night. As long as you need, I can apply to be your foster guardian. It's not fancy here, but it's safe. You've got a room, a family, a place." Her brow furrowed, the paintbrush still clutched in her hand. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you've been on your own too long. I know you've had to keep moving just to survive. And I know that nobody should have to feel like they don't belong anywhere." Sophie looked away, blinking hard. "You don't have to fix me," she whispered. "I'm not trying to fix you," Ethan replied. "I just want you to have the chance to breathe without looking over your shoulder." The garage was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the space heater in the corner. Sophie set her brush down, wiping her fingers on her jeans. "What about Mia? Did you ask her?" Ethan smiled. "Pretty sure she's been asking me without saying it. You've seen her. She lights up when you're around." "That doesn't mean I should stay," Sophie said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It means you have a choice now," Ethan answered. "And if you say yes, I'll call Janet tomorrow morning before they make any arrangements. We'll start the paperwork right away so you won't have to leave." That night at dinner, Ethan didn't make a big speech. He just looked across the table and said, "So, how would you feel about making this your home?" Mia's fork clattered against her plate. "Really?" she burst out, turning to Sophie with wide eyes. "Please say yes, please." Sophie's mouth opened, then closed again. Her gaze moved between the two of them, like she was measuring something invisible. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "Okay," she said quietly, "I'll stay." Mia leapt from her chair and threw her arms around Sophie, nearly knocking her backward. Ethan caught the look on Sophie's face, surprise, disbelief, and something else that looked dangerously close to hope. For the first time since that night in the alley, she let herself lean into the hug and didn't pull away. 3 months passed, but for Sophie it felt like a lifetime had unfolded in the span of a single season. The girl who had once sat in the corner of her room like a shadow was now part of the rhythm of the house. She and Mia had a Saturday ritual of baking muffins. Half the time they burned, but Mia insisted that the smell alone made it worth it. On school mornings, Sophie would braid Mia's hair while Ethan packed lunches, the three of them moving around the kitchen like they'd been doing it for years. There were still moments when the past crept in. Nights when Sophie woke from dreams that left her sitting up in the dark, heart racing. But now there was a knock at her door, a cup of tea in Ethan's hand, and Mia's sleepy voice calling, "You okay?" from down the hall. The garage had turned into something more than a makeshift art studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, each one telling a different story, some loud with colour, others quiet and soft, like the life she was building. The painting she kept returning to was the one with the 3 chairs at the kitchen table. It had started as empty seats. Now each one was filled, the faces warm and unmistakable. Ethan noticed the changes in her, subtle but steady. She laughed more freely, asked questions at dinner, even teased him about his habit of humming while he worked. Mia noticed too, though in her own way, like the afternoon she came home from school, saw Sophie in the driveway, and ran to her first before saying hello to her dad. One crisp evening, Ethan was locking up the garage when he found Sophie outside, staring up at the winter sky. "Feels different here," she said quietly, "like I don't have to keep my bag packed." "That's because you don't," he replied. She looked over at him, and for the first time, there was no trace of the guarded expression she'd worn that night in the alley. Just a calm, steady light in her eyes. Inside, Mia was already setting the table for dinner, calling for them to hurry before the food got cold. Sophie smiled at the sound and started toward the door, Ethan following close behind. It wasn't just shelter anymore, it was home. The first snow of the year fell on a Friday, blanketing the little town in soft white. That evening, the 3 of them walked to the community centre for the annual winter art show. Sophie had been hesitant to submit anything, but Mia wouldn't hear of it. "People need to see your paintings," she'd insisted, practically marching her to the registration desk the week before. Now Sophie stood in front of her work, the finished piece of the kitchen table with 3 chairs, each one painted in warm golden light, each face captured with gentle detail. People stopped to look, some leaning in to take it all in, others asking quiet questions. A woman in a heavy wool coat lingered for a long time before speaking. "This reminds me of a place I used to call home," she said softly, her eyes glassy. Sophie didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. Ethan watched from a few feet away, Mia perched on his shoulders to get a better view of the crowd. He saw it happen. The moment Sophie realised that what she'd made mattered to someone else, that her story, painted in colour and light, had a place in the world outside their walls. Later that night, back at the house, they decorated the Christmas tree together. Mia insisted Sophie hang the last ornament, a little wooden heart painted gold. Sophie stepped onto the stool, found the perfect branch near the top, and nestled it in. As she stepped down, Ethan handed her a mug of hot cider. "You know," he said, "I thought I was saving you that night, but I think maybe you were saving us too." Sophie looked at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Guess we saved each other then." Mia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, glanced up between them. "That means we're all stuck together now, right?" Ethan chuckled. "That's exactly what it means." The 3 of them settled onto the couch, the tree lights casting a soft glow across the room. Sophie leaned back, feeling the quiet thrum of belonging in her chest. She thought of that alley, the cold, the fear, and how a single person choosing to stop had rewritten everything. For the first time in years, she didn't wonder where she'd be tomorrow. She already knew. She was home. One person choosing to stop can change an entire life. Kindness and patience not only save others, but also heal us in return. Thank you for staying with me until the very last moment of this story. I'm truly grateful for that. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to Rain Inside for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next one.